everyone, and welcome back. I'm Toni and this is my first show back after a little break, and I'm truly delighted that this show, Poetry in Motion with Sonee Singh, will be my first show back. But before I introduce you to my glorious co-host, here's what you need to know. If you're listening live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, we encourage you to reach out with comments, and know that if you miss the live show, you can find it available on Binge Networks USA, Hero Go TV USA, Zondra Networks USA, and the Toni TV channel app, available on all Roku, Samsung, and LG smart TVs across the planet. Now, we started earlier this year doing an important part of recognising our Indigenous peoples of Australia, and it's called A Welcome to Country, and it goes like this. So I want to respectfully acknowledge the people of the Yugambeh language region on the Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and broadcast, and pay my respect to the elders past and present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders listening here or watching today. Now, this is the first show in a 6-show series where I get to introduce you to Sonee Singh, who is a phenomenal poet, writer, and speaker, as well as many other things that I'm going to tell you about today. Now, here's what you need to know about Sonee. Sonee is a cross-cultural seeker of deep knowing. She writes stories of self-discovery to encourage people to accept themselves as they are and live a life on their own terms. Her tales are of her characters' definitive moments on their life journey. The mystical and spiritual are an integral part of her storytelling, as she is a multicultural background, which is just going to be one of the wonderful things that we talk about today. Sonee is of Indian descent, born in Mexico, raised in Colombia, and now living in the United States. She is world traveled, and when she's not traveling, reading, writing, she indulges in meditation, yoga, and aromatherapy. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Biology and Society, a Master of Management in Hospitality with Cornell University, and a Master of Science in Complementary Alternative Medicine from the American College of Healthcare Sciences. She is currently pursuing a Doctor of Divinity. How glorious are those words together? A Doctor of Divinity from the University of Metaphysical Sciences. And while she's worked in hospitality a lot before practicing as a wellness coach, she is also certified as an integrative nutrition health coach, an international certified health coach, a Reiki master, a registered aromatherapist, a certified crystal energy guide, a certified angel card master and intuitive, and a certification in her writing. Sonee is a divine human being, and she's written 3 poetry books to date, and there are more coming. And her Soul Seeker poetry collection includes Embody, Embrace, and Embolden. And she's also been published in 3 anthologies, including Blessing the Page, The Colours of Me, and The Wishing Stone. She has multiple articles published in the Elephant Journal, and her upcoming novel, Lonely Dove, will be released very soon, and we will do some live releasing of that book on this series of shows. If you want to follow Sonee, please jump onto website Sonee Singh, SONEESINGH.com. Sonee, welcome to the show.
What an introduction. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you. What an honor to be your first guest after this break that you've had to take.
Sonee, just quickly to remind the viewers, I have been off the airwaves for about 3 months, had a little diversion and a little battle with quite a large skin cancer. So I'm going to take this opportunity for everyone listening and watching today. Please go and get your skin checked. Most skin cancers are absolutely and readily treatable by a whole range of means that not necessarily mean surgery. And I want to just encourage you to do that today. But back to the show, Sonee, I wanted to start at the very beginning and get you to tell me about growing up. So you're born in Mexico. Do you have any concrete memories of living in Mexico? And what was that time like?
I actually don't because
I
I,
thought so. You a baby.
yes, I left Mexico when I was 5 months old. So I currently still have and carry a Mexican passport, and I will until the day I die. So
Oh,
it's so funny that I have an allegiance and a connection to the country, but I've
yes.
not lived in Mexico, or I didn't when I was a child. I've done a lot of
You've
work
been
and
back.
traveled. Yeah, quite a
Yeah.
lot. And I love it every time I come in and they say, "Welcome home."
Oh, Simone, there's quite deep spiritual ties through the culture of Mexico. Do you feel some of that in what you do and how you write?
Absolutely. I would say it is integral, and I think in a lot of ancient cultures, I've kind of formed ties probably because of my travels, but Mexico in
Yeah.
particular, on the spiritual journey sort of that I've been on, a lot of my deeper connections have happened while I was in Mexico. So
Oh,
yes, it holds a very dear space and place in my heart. But yeah, unfortunately, as a child, I don't have any memories.
do your parents talk about that time in Mexico?
A lot, because that was their first place where they lived after leaving India. And
Yes.
it was quite a challenging times for them because this is, we're talking about the
Yeah.
70s. There weren't a lot of resources. And so, and also there was a small community of Indians in Mexico. Now it's a lot bigger, but at that
Yes.
time, it was challenging not knowing the language, not knowing how to drive, and all these things that they had to learn. So yes, they talk about it a lot. We still eat Mexican food. In fact, today we had Mexican food for lunch.
What do you had they told you what it was about Mexico that drew them as having an Indian background? What drew them to Mexico, Sonny?
Well, I mean, really, it was the job. My
Yes,
father worked for agricultural institutes, and so there was one in India, one in Mexico, and then eventually one in Colombia that he worked for. And that's what drew them there. But I think the connection really was just an affinity for the country, the culture. It
mm-hmm.
also has a lot of ancient history, a lot of the
Yes,
food. Even it's different kind of spice, but it's still
but
spicy
it's the
food. And I
same.
feel,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
there's quite a lot of affinity. And it's funny because over the years, as I've met either Mexicans or
mm-hmm.
Indians, they all
Mm-hmm.
talk about this connection that they have. Like Mexicans love to travel to India to kind of
I
have this sort of
wondered because there's
awakening
a
thing.
synergy. There's a
There
synergy there,
is.
isn't there? And
There
both
is.
are ancient cultures. There's a background in spicy food, and I can actually see the connection between the two countries. So, moving to Colombia, you were a baby when you moved. Do you
Yes.
have any memories of Colombia?
Oh, yeah, that for sure, because I was there until I was 18. So I
Yes,
did
so
all of my schooling in Colombia. I moved to the US to go to university or
university.
college, as we call it here.
Mm.
But yeah, for sure. I mean, Colombia is where my heart is of growing up, where I always have my memories of comfort. And sadly, I haven't been back since my parents left, and they
Yeah.
they left when I was in my third year in college. But I still have a strong connection. I mean, I identify with it
With
in terms of
Colombia.
it being
Mm.
the place where I feel connected in terms of my youth and where I'm from.
Mm. What's Can you share with the audience some of the special things that you remember from Colombia that cause you to identify so closely with Colombia?
The people are so friendly. I would say they're warm and friendly and welcoming.
Yeah.
I would say that's one of the biggest things.
Mm.
that I identify and in fact miss, because especially as you travel and you see different cultures, some are more closed, some are more open. I would say the Colombian one for sure is really
Mm.
open. I mean, they're very warm-hearted and
Yes.
fun-loving people. It's also beautiful, just scenic
Uh-huh.
country, nature-wise, between the oceans, the mountains, because the Andes come in there, the
Yeah.
tropical environment, and you have
It's
just
pretty
a whole
diverse, isn't
range.
it?
It is really diverse. And the Amazon is also there. So it's a really diverse
Mm.
country. And the food, I mean, it's crazy to think
Oh
because
no, I love
food
talking
is not
about
all
food.
that well known, but yeah, I really miss the food.
Yeah, yeah. Did you get to spend time in and around the Amazon? Because it is an amazing place and has provided humanity with some amazing discoveries. Did you get to spend much time in and around the Amazon?
I did not, unfortunately, not when I was there. It's one of those things that I keep on thinking I have to
I've
do
got
it
to
at
go
some point in
back.
my life, but
Mm.
no, unfortunately not. We were further away. We're sort of in the
Yes.
southwestern part of the country.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, no, not close to the Amazon, unfortunately. I'm sure that would be a
Fantastic.
magical experience, though.
Absolutely. Every time I read something about the plants or the animals that have been discovered in the Amazon region rather, I feel like there's so many more secrets to be unfolded from the Amazon. So it's a, what a great place in history and time that we live in, where there's ongoing discoveries and transfer of knowledge to generations of people.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's amazing every time you hear about something else being
Mhm.
discovered that nobody knew about. And it's just so
Yes.
remote and so hard to get to that, yeah, it's incredible, but very
And I
inspiring.
think that's protected it being remote and difficult to get to,
Hmm.
has somewhat protected the wonderful things that the and secrets that the Amazon hides. I actually remember reading very recently about one of the last of the uncontacted tribes and and his passing, and he had never had interaction with anyone outside of his own tribe, and he was the last surviving member of his tribe, but he was monitored by Amazonian government officials just to keep an eye from a respectful distance, but to keep an eye
Hmm.
on his health and to see that he was okay. But I remember reading that he spent something like 35 years alone
Oh my gosh.
because his tribe succumbed to modern viruses and etc etc, and I'm like, oh wow. And it struck me as, I can't believe that in this day and age we still have isolated pockets of indigenous peoples who are still living life of ancient times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing. And especially when you hear these stories and you think,
Yeah.
how could somebody be in the middle of a very populated continent and still make it on their own?
Correct, correct, correct. Sonny, I'm curious to know, knowing your background and what you've studied, what you actually wanted to be when you grew up as a child. Do you remember what you wanted to be?
The first
Ah,
profession I ever wanted to have was a cash register. I wanted to be a cashier.
cool.
I wasn't ambitious at all.
And and then so what did it so it started out as a cashier, and how did it progress?
It evolved into wanting to be a nurse.
Ah, yes,
I
I can see that.
really I wanted to help people.
Mm,
But really what I wanted to was help people feel better.
mm,
And the reason was when I went to the doctor and had to get a vaccine, it was the nurse
yes,
who gave me the candy.
yes, yes. That's a
So
good
that's
job for
why I wanted
nurses.
to be a nurse. Um, and as I grew up, I think, I mean, not I think, it evolved
Yes.
into wanting to be a medical doctor, which is why I have such
Yeah.
a
A
background in
diverse.
sciences.
Mm, mm.
But I didn't pursue that in the end. I mean, so schooling in the US is different
Mm.
than it would have
Yeah.
been had I stayed in Colombia, because there I would have had to graduate from school and go directly to medical school. Whereas in the
Yes.
US, you do 4 years of college and then you
And
pursue
then,
higher education.
yeah.
And it was when I was in college that I realized it wasn't for me, in the sense
Mm.
that I've always been drawn to the healing sciences and to
Yes.
wellness, but I didn't want to be in the profession because I also have when I connect with people, I take them on, meaning
Yes.
I
Yes. There's in it for you, there's an energy transfer,
yeah.
isn't
And
there?
at that point, I didn't really know how to deal with it. And so I realized, like, every
Yeah.
time somebody comes to me, they're going to be unwell. And I don't know if I have it in me to deal with that as a profession.
Yeah.
Um, and so I then changed into hospitality and I stayed in
And
hospitality for a long time, actually.
yeah. Sonny, how old were you when you discovered that intuitive or spiritual side of your being? Do you remember?
I would say I always had it. I don't know that I had, I mean, there was a couple of experiences I would say as a child that things would happen to me and I wouldn't necessarily have an explanation for it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But I felt a connection to kind of the deeper worlds from a very early age. What happened though is once I started talking about it and I'd hear
Yes.
people's reactions kind of go like, wait, what are you talking about? I stopped. You immediately
Yes.
think like, oh, I don't want to be judged. And so
Yeah.
uh, what I remember, what I have a more distinct memory of is shutting down, is sort of turning
Oh.
around and saying, oh, okay, that's an area that I'm not going to explore very much. And it's funny because I feel like it stayed dormant for most of my life until I turned
And
into an adult.
yeah, isn't it sad to hear the stories of people shutting down their intuition or their psychic abilities because of the reaction of other people? And I actually believe that we will get to the point in our evolution as human beings where we understand that a person as a whole has a physical being and a spiritual being. And if you're going to be in a healing profession, i.e., a doctor, nurse, or in complementary, I actually believe that the two should be woven together. And one of my big visions is to proactively work out how we can promote that so that when you go and see a doctor, for instance, there's a spiritual component of that consultation that addresses the spiritual aspect of that human being. Because both you and I know that there are defined links between our spiritual beliefs, what goes on in our mind, and what transpires in our body. Having recently been through this whole little process myself, I've had to realize that there is a direct correlation and connection between what manifested itself as a cancer on my skin and what I wasn't dealing with, what I hadn't healed, and what I'd not talked about, but more on that down the track. Sonny, since you started training and studying in the metaphysical arts, have you felt a shift across humanity towards understanding the more spiritual aspects of our life?
I haven't. I think there is just a lot more
Yeah.
either consciousness, awareness.
Hmm.
I think had I, for instance, been born now and started talking about the things that I did, I don't
Yeah,
think I would have been shut down in the same way. And I think we've just all
correct.
evolved and all been maybe become more aware of the connection that we have with one another and with the world around us.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I definitely think there's been, even in conversation, I can
Yes.
talk about being a spiritual person and not have somebody think,
That that means Christian or
yeah.
some other. Yes. There's
Although
a.
I do still get asked that question about religion
Ah,
often, but
yes. Yes. And
not
and
as much as before.
And Sony, I know that we have similar thoughts along this, but they're very different. So, being a spiritual person in terms of how you and I think of spirituality is completely different from being a Christian and or having a religious background. From my perspective, they are completely different um, aspects of life, aren't they?
I believe so. I mean, for me, religion is more of a dogma in the sense of,
Yes,
this is how you're meant to act, and these are
correct.
the kind of criteria or basis to live your life, versus spirituality is more about
Free
feeling
flowing and
the connection with the people and the environment, the universe, Earth.
yes,
So it's
and
a
not
lot less dogmatic and a lot more
yes.
based on the self.
Definitely. And a lot less prescriptive, a lot less judgmental, if I hazard to say that. Having grown up in a Christian environment, and now considering myself more of a spiritual being, there's a clear difference in the judgment that is experienced under religion and the lack of freedom of choice and the prescription around how you should act and behave versus a spiritual belief that there is a greater being, be that whatever your spiritual alignment. I actually think that that is better for humanity. It's better for humans to know and understand that as a unique being, you're not going to necessarily want to act, say, or do in a prescriptive way. Sonee, I love that you're doing a Doctor of Divinity. And as I mentioned in the intro, a Doctor of Divinity just gives me chills. I don't know why, but every time I say it, it gives me goosebumps. And so you're doing that with the University of Metaphysical Sciences, which is just brilliant that we now have a University of Metaphysical Sciences. I love that. And of course, I know that you enjoy this field of study immensely. What actually prompted the enrollment? How are you enjoying it? And what are some of the key things that you've learnt along the way?
So I have always been interested in spirituality and religion, and kind of touching on your point that we were talking about
Yeah.
before, religion is an avenue for spirituality. And really, when you look at the core
Yes.
essences of every religion, it's all about spirituality. It's all about
Mm.
connection and
Mm.
oneness. And it doesn't matter what religion that
Yeah.
is. The judgment comes in the person, right? In the human
Mm.
aspect of wanting to use
Yes.
that as a means or a reason to
Of
separate. But that
control.
yeah, right. And that
Mm.
has always been a fascinating aspect. I didn't just want to concentrate, though, on religion. I mean,
Mm.
I wanted to study religions across the world, and
Yes.
uh,
Because they're fascinating, aren't they,
there
Sonny? Like,
are
really fascinating, and there's synergies between all of them.
absolutely. And that's the thing that, I think really kind of in terms of the takeaways is that it doesn't matter in a way what religion you're looking at. Really, at its core essence, it's all about us understanding that we're part of the bigger whole. And when
Mm.
we have that understanding, we act with more kindness and compassion towards each other, because we realize
Definitely.
that what affects me affects you and affects the next person.
Mm.
And so if I can help in any way and you can help me, then
Yeah.
we're all better. But also, for instance, even in healing,
Yeah.
the connection, the deeper connection where our bodies are actually wanting to send messages to us to say, hey, maybe you need to do things differently.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And that to me has always been just fascinating. And so a lot of what I've taken from the courses has been this kind of understanding of connections
Mm.
and finding these similarities that we have. But also on a personal level, just my
Mm.
own development, just
Yeah.
we're all
Yes.
onions in a way. We all have to kind
Oh,
of peel
yes.
layers and
Layers and
layers.
layers and
And
layers.
that's what life is about. And we will probably be doing that until the day we die.
Well,
And across
I actually
lives, it
hope
continues.
we are. Like, Sonia,
Yeah,
from my perspective, I love to learn. I love to be challenged. Sometimes in the heat of those challenging moments, I'm a little unsure. But when you get to the other side, it's like, oh, well, I learnt this and this, and that's good. But in the moment of those challenge, when you start to think deeply about a certain aspect of your life or your personality, it can be really challenging, can't it? But
it
on
can.
the
And
other
sometimes
side,
Yeah, you just have to go through the journey though, like you want to have an answer for everything and sometimes you
Yes.
just can't and you have to allow yourself the space to heal in order to figure out. And
Yeah.
sometimes, it's not really in order to figure out, it's
No,
more about what lesson am I gaining out of this? And we may not always have a clear understanding of why things happen, but it's also
correct.
about knowing that it's not a coincidence that something's
No. I absolutely believe that things happen to us for a reason, and that reason may simply be as a catalyst for something else in our life, or a learning lesson, or a growth lesson, or on the path to living our best life. I don't think that it's all there for a reason. You've just got to look for the reason in that moment, and you will find it, or otherwise you'll move through it and get to the other side, and it's another element that makes you a unique human being. Sonny, when you start the story, pardon me, I'll rephrase that. I wanted to talk to you about the story and the catalyst that actually prompted you to start writing the beautiful poetry that emanated from your soul. Can you tell the audience about that? Because it's a really lovely story and it leads into the next series, the next shows when we're going to be talking about each of Sonee's beautiful poetry books and then, of course, her novel. But can you tell that story? It's a lovely story.
I will.
It's a lovely
So
story, but it started from a bad place, is what
it
I'm, yeah.
did.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, actually, my writing journey on a whole started from a bad place, if you think about it, label
Yes.
it that way. But it was health.
Yeah.
I started writing. And so I should say this because despite the fact that I have all these degrees and certifications, I actually don't practice in any of them right now.
Yeah.
I am a full-time writer.
Yes.
And
Which is
so it's
awesome.
interesting that I had to go through that journey.
Mm.
And uh, I started writing mostly because I had gotten really ill. Me
Mm.
trying to kind of process the illness, realized where is it that I've been sort of not giving myself the space to be me. And I realized it was in writing.
Yeah.
I'd always wanted to write. And I kind of secretly, never telling anybody, used to write stories. And so this sort of, once I allowed myself to be
Uh-huh.
me and myself, and that's why a lot of my writing is about self-discovery and giving ourselves permission to be who we truly are. It's
Yeah.
because of my own personal journey and my acceptance of that. And so that's when I started writing full time. I mean, writing novels. I'm writing my first novel that's about to come out. But the poetry really happened unexpectedly because
Yeah.
we hit COVID
Yes.
and all of a sudden, we were in lockdowns, not this uncertainty of not even knowing, how long is this going to last or what's going to happen
Mm.
next. And by then I had already developed a habit of writing on a daily basis. And so
Uh-huh.
writing for me is both sort of an emotional, spiritual practice, as well as just
Yes.
what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And the emotional, spiritual aspect is I write stream of consciousness. So I would sit down every morning, and I still have the habit to just free flow
Right.
write without judgment. So just whatever comes in my head as a way to release, thought.
Yes.
And when COVID hit, and all of a sudden we were in isolation, at the time I was living by myself.
Yeah.
And I realized in the eeriness of just not being able to see people, not wanting to leave your apartment or not being able to leave your
To
apartment,
leave.
what I started writing was lyrical.
Yes.
And I'd reread what I wrote and kind of think like, I think that sounds like a poem. Uh, and so I just started kind of taking it out of that
Yeah.
context and
Mm-hmm.
writing it out into the stanzas, and then realized, oh yeah, that's a poem.
Oh.
And once I accepted that I was writing poetry or that I was
Yeah.
writing a poem, then
Mm-hmm.
I would just write them. And what was fascinating about it is I've never intended to write poetry. I've always been a poetry
Yes.
lover in the sense of reading it, but never thought, oh, I want to be a
You would
poet.
write. Mm.
So it wasn't something that I set out to do, but once I embraced it, it just flowed. I mean, I ended up, so I started writing the poetry around March of
Mm,
2020. And
yes.
then by November, I had something like 150 poems. I mean, they flowed.
It's really amazing, isn't it, that that
I didn't even know
happened?
where that came from. And it wasn't like I'd sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write a poem. They just come to me and I just write
And
and
you
write
just
and
have
write.
to write them as they
Yes.
came to you. Yeah. Amazing, amazing. As we go through this series, I'm going to get you to share with the audience some of those poems. So everyone will have to tune in for those. So at the moment, you've got three poetry books.
Yes.
um, and embody, embrace, and embolden.
Mhm.
And are you surprised when you reflect that you had enough content to fill these beautiful books?
Absolutely. I mean, even when I got to that point in November 2020 to
Mm.
look back, I didn't know how many poems I had written until
Ah,
I decided. I mean, I actually didn't know what I was going to do with them. And it
yes,
was a conversation that I had with Karen McDermott, who
yeah.
is my publisher through MMH
Mm.
Press, and we had connected on a different topic. And I
Mm.
had told her that I was writing poems, and I said, I don't know what to do with them. And I took out the stack and I just showed her the stack of papers because they were
Yeah,
just handwritten papers.
written. Hmm.
And she said to me, well, I know what you can do with them.
Yes, as Karen does.
Karen and her magic.
Yes, Karen and her magic. She knows exactly
And
what
so
to
she
do.
just said to me, sort through them and let me know. And I did. And that's when I started typing them. And that is how I realized how many poems I had because I actually started typing them up. And,
Mm.
after we went through the whole exercise, that's when I started identifying themes and recognizing that I
I
could
was
put
going to
them
ask, did they
into the
naturally
books.
fall into the three books naturally without too
Yes.
much? Yeah?
Yes, they
Wow.
did in a way that was very unexpected.
Mm,
So I was when I had a follow-up conversation with Karen and was talking to her about the kind of the themes that were coming across in the poem,
mm.
she was the one who came up with the word embody, and that
Ah,
sparked the whole
the
journey.
rest.
And so when she said embody, it just sort of set the tone for everything else. And I realized that really the journey of the books or the journey that I had through COVID, and
Mm.
the poems don't really have anything to do with COVID, but it's my
No,
own
that I was
kind of
just going to say
personal
they're not
story.
about really COVID. They're
No.
beautiful words constructed into beautiful lyrical poems.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
it's
there's probably a handful that deal specifically, but yeah,
mm,
I mean, in between the three books, there's roughly 300 poems. So it's quite a lot.
amazing. Amazing. My question, Sony, are poems still coming to you? Are you
Oh yeah,
still able to channel poems? So you're still writing poetry?
absolutely.
Ah, fantastic. Thank goodness for that. So there will
Yeah,
be more poetry
there
to
will be
come.
more poetry. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. How is the transition from poetry back to writing? Because you've always written, but writing a novel is a difference again. So, how's that going? How's that been for you?
It's been really interesting in the sense that I can sit down and say, I'm going to work on my novel today.
Mhm.
And, I'm going to give it 2 hours and I will work the two
Yeah.
hours. I'll give it 5 hours and I'll work the five
And
hours, or I'll work the entire day and I
yes,
do it. With the poetry, I don't really have that control
no, it
unless
just
I'm
comes.
editing. Yeah. I
Ah,
don't sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to write a poem.
mm,
The poems come when they come.
yes.
When I have to edit them, then I can say, okay, now I have these collections. And and
And
and
they
really
go,
what happens is I'll start writing the poetry and kind of start putting them in folders according to themes that are coming up.
ah, yes,
Sometimes I have some that are in other
just
or miscellaneous because I don't really know if
don't
they
know where
fit
they're going.
somewhere. And
Mm,
that's how I start kind of compiling them. So
mhm.
the themes just, in a way, come up on their own.
Mm.
Whereas with the novels,
Yeah, it's a different sort of
it's a
writing
completely different
and
scenario because
process.
there I'm creating a story and it's
Mm.
intentional. And
Mm.
not that the poetry is not intentional, it's just it
No,
happens in the
just different.
moment and I'm capturing the moment.
Mm.
Whereas in a novel, I'm
You're crafting a
deliberately
story.
trying to create something.
Mm.
Character stories, trying to figure out how do I show this character's progression. And my novels are character driven. My short stories are
Mm.
all character driven.
Yeah.
And so it's, I have an understanding of where I want the character to be at the start of the novel and where I
Yes.
want them to end. And so I know that before I sit down.
Yeah.
How they get there, I don't always know that.
Yeah, that was my next question, Sonny. Do you actually map out? Um, this is where I want the character to start with this sort of personality and these positive traits and these other traits, and I want them to get to here where they learn about truth and destiny or whatever it is, or it actually is very free flowing for you.
It is free flowing. So amongst us kind of fiction writers, there's a term of
Mm.
pantser versus plotter, where a
Yes,
plotter
yes, yes,
will outline the whole
yes.
story and a pantser just writes off,
Just goes. Yes,
off the seat of their pants.
yes.
I'm a pantser, absolutely. When I
Ah,
say that I know uh, where my character is and where I want her to be at the end, I have an understanding as, for instance, with the story that I'm working on now, she's an underdog, and so I want her. I know that she's going to be this sort of quiet, very sheltered person.
yes.
And by the end of the book, I want her to be empowered and
Yeah.
awakened in a way, but I don't know how she's going to get there. And
Get there.
sometimes I don't actually know who she is until she starts telling me.
Mm.
So I explore aspects of her. And so, and some of them I don't know until I'm putting her in a scenario and I think, how would
How would
she
she
act?
react? Yeah, yeah.
And so then I start writing it out, and then I realize, oh, well, for her to react this way, something needs to have happened to her. So
Mm.
then I have to make sure that I go back and sort of fix it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, yeah, I just sort of see where the story goes, and then when I have my first draft completed,
Then
it's really full of holes. I have to go back and fix it
it
and
actually.
realize things need to be reorganized and
I
several things are
actually.
missing. And also, I've overwritten.
Mm.
I'm one of those people who will
Yes,
overwrite and then
yes,
have to condense.
yes. Yes, 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 I understand that. I've had lots and lots of conversations with people over the years about their writing style and how they write, and lots of conversations with people thinking that they had a book to write and then just not knowing how to start. And my response has always been just start at one point
Mm-hmm.
and write in and around that, because it doesn't have to flow in any way until you get to the point where you're editing, because that's when you shuffle things around and adjust things and correct what you've overwritten or and embellish what you've underwritten. And it doesn't have to. I think for people think that they have to write in a certain way to produce a novel, but you don't, do you, Sony?
You don't. And some people are really good at outlining and they
Oh
will
yes,
sit down and they
yes,
have the story and they just write
yes,
to it.
yes.
But that doesn't necessarily need to be the case. And as you said, you can just start writing from whatever point it is that, you're
Mm,
being inspired to tell the story. And at least if it happens like it did in my case,
mm.
my novel, the one that's coming out, had four different starts. And a lot of it depended on
Ah,
either how the story evolved, but
yes,
also recognizing, oh, this point further along is really where the character is inspired to change. So let's move that forward.
mm,
And all
yeah,
these other things can be backstory or can be flashbacks or can be something
yes,
else.
yes,
And that's how you rearrange things to figure out what's the best way to
mm,
grab the reader's attention.
yeah,
Uh, and that becomes your focus in the editing process is what do you do in order to grab that
Yeah,
person so that they start reading the novel and don't want to put it down. But right when you're writing, no, I mean that wouldn't be the
I
first
know
thing in
it's
your mind.
you write as that inspiration strikes you. That's the best time. Although, in talking to lots of writers, many of them are very disciplined around their
Mhm.
writing, like you are. So they write for an hour every morning, or they write whatever their schedule is. They strictly stick to that schedule to get that book written and done in a certain
Mhm.
time frame. For some of the authors that I speak to, they voice record. Do you do any voice recording, Sonny?
I don't.
You
I tend
write?
to think in order to speak. I'm an introvert
Yes,
in that
yes,
sense. And
yes.
so for me, the processing of the thoughts happen as I write. So yeah, I would not be a good recorder. It'd be
It's
nonsense.
it's fascinating how different people write or like to produce their articles or books or whatever it is, and it seems to be different. There's lots of similarities, but it seems to be different for different people. I know writers who only voice record and then
Mhm.
get the transcript and go through the editing process. Um, and I've tried both, but I find that I'm more like you, Sonny, in that I'm generally an introvert and there's lots of conversations go on in my head, but they don't actually make it outside of my head into a recorder or onto a piece of paper. And I'm trying to train myself to get better in those
Mhm.
things. I'm curious, Sonny, with all that wonderful learning from university, do you use that learning in creating your characters and does it appear in some of your poems, some of the things that you learn, particularly around the metaphysical sciences?
Absolutely. There's always some spiritual, esoteric element in my writing.
Yes,
Um, the way I describe it is the poetry is my reflection of how I see either the world, my experiences, the connection. The novels are fictional, so I will
yes,
put myself in another person's shoes in order to acknowledge that, as you say,
yes,
everybody's different.
yes,
And by nature, I see connections, I see signs, I see
yes,
symbols.
yes,
I look for meaning, and
yes.
so I bring that into everything that I write. And it's not that every single poem has that, but it is definitely uh, in all of my writing. I would say
Mm,
in the novels, um, because they're stories of self-discovery and self-development, the spiritual
yeah,
aspect is almost a must. It's just
yeah,
how
yes.
open is the character to that aspect and how do they use that or how do they
Mm,
welcome it into their lives. But I incorporate crystals, herbs,
yes,
tarot cards,
yes. Oh, fantastic.
spiritual teachers,
Yes,
religion, understanding
yes,
religion,
yes,
all of that.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Sony, I wanted to talk a little bit about Ireland with you whilst we had the audience listening because it was such a I'm going to say it was a magical experience. So, Sony and I went to Ireland in June. Yes, June.
Yes, it was in
And
June.
we went and stayed in this magnificent castle and it was a really fabulous retreat for writers and speakers. Sonny, can you tell the audience how it was for you? Because I loved it. I loved meeting you in person. Because Sonny and I have known each other for a while now, but that was actually the
Mhm.
first time I think we've met in person was in Ireland.
It was a Peel Manor,
Oh no,
in
it was at Peel Manor.
yeah,
That's right. Yes. So we'd previously met in Peel Manor, which is over in Perth, Western Australia, which is on the way other side of the country. And then we met up again in Ireland. But Ireland was just so beautiful, wasn't it? Do you want to
it
tell
was
people about
spectacular.
your experience?
Well, I so that was the second time that I'd been at Crom Castle. The
Mm.
first time was the first time I met Karen in person.
Yes. Yes.
And at that time, the first time, I had just finished, I think, a third draft of the novel that I have coming out, Lonely Dove.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting in the sense that when I got to the castle, uh, I didn't know what to expect. I mean, you
Yeah,
sort of
you
hear about a
don't.
castle, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so grandiose in the
It
sense
is
of this
beautiful.
beautiful stone building.
Mm.
And then it's surrounded by woods and there's
Yes.
a lake. And I mean, it's
Yes.
just so
A wishing
pristine.
stone. The
There's
wishing stone. There's
rose
like,
gardens. I mean, so many things that it was sort of the prime environment for
Mhm.
reflection, for inspiration,
Yes,
and
connection
connection. Yeah.
and there's an energy, almost like a pervading ancient wisdom. I don't
Hmm.
know. I don't know if that's quite gives it an accuracy, but it was just beautiful. And the rooms that you stay and the grounds are just lend themselves to writing and reconnecting, and it was magical. And of course, the castle itself is beautiful, and then you have a housekeeper and a butler and a cook, and they're divine human
Yes.
beings. So the
Francis,
cook
Cynthia, and
and
Joan.
yes, Cynthia and Joan. So the housekeeper and the cook have this beautiful, their mother is an ancient tea reader. So there's all these synergies that come to pass. And the way that Cynthia looks after you via her cooking
Hmm.
is really special, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, to think Cynthia and Joan are sisters, they grew up in those grounds.
Yes.
So they,
And
they
they've
also have a long
served the
history.
castle owners
Yeah, it
for
is.
hundreds of years, I think,
Yes.
like a hundred, I don't know. It's a long
Yeah.
time
I don't know
that
either, but
they've,
it's a long
it's a
time.
long time that they've served the owners of the castle in
Hmm.
some way or form. So
Yeah.
it's a magical experience.
Yes. And then Francis comes in from Belfast, and I mean,
Yeah.
he's a professional in the
It
highest
is.
regard. It is just
Is
amazing.
beautiful. And I think that's part of the experience is to have those central characters, if you will, in and around you, and loving and caring for you in a way that I've not experienced before. And
Yeah.
in the grounds of this ancient castle with all of its history and energy, it is really a magical. I've talked to so many people about this retreat, and it's run by Karen and the team at MMH Press, and it is just the best experience. I can't wait for the next one because I don't think I could miss another one now.
Yeah. Well, and see, that's the thing. That's why I had to go back.
Yes.
Because after having
Yes.
experienced it that one time, I
Mm-hmm.
realized it was so, I mean, indescribable in a way,
Yes.
but also
Yes, I
so
agree.
magical that I had to go back. And, the first time I went was 2019. So it was
Yes.
pre-COVID. And then
Yeah.
this last time in
Then the
June.
COVID. And we sort of, no one did anything for a few years.
Yeah. So yeah, but it's the perfect environment to kind of reset.
Oh, yes. And
That's
there's
what I would say.
something about, for instance, it had these fields of beautiful yellow flowers that you sort of looked out of your window to these fields, and the deer would come prancing along, and the walks through the forest and down by the lake, and then the we went on some trips to some ancient ruins, and that
Hmm.
was amazing as well. The history grabs my soul, Sony. I just,
Yeah. Ireland, Northern Ireland is just magical. I mean,
and
I
you're transported back in
yeah,
time almost. That's what it
yes.
feels like, that you're transported back in time. You're still present in this time and age, but for some reason you're transported back to ancient wisdom and energy, and you just completely relax.
Yeah, and
Well,
a
I
lot of
did.
people go there and write, and some people
Mm,
don't write at
yes.
all, but they still feel replenished and
Yes.
invigorated, and just, when you leave full of
Agreed.
ideas, like all these things
Yes.
that you
Yes, I
didn't
agree
even think
that.
you had in you, you have.
Correct, correct, correct. All of those things happened for me as well, and it was the starting ground of thinking about what was next for me, because at that time I'd had my cancer diagnosis, but I didn't yet realize how bad it was. So I was a bit like happy blasé. It was also my first overseas trip in close to 3 years. So there were lots of things. And then all the people that went to the retreat were just amazing human beings in their own right, all writers of different genres and different backgrounds. And it was truly a unique event, Sonia. And yeah, I think that for anyone who's thinking about writing, if they get themselves involved with a writer's retreat of that level, it will make the change in their writing journey, don't you think?
I think it is pivotal, and what you said is
Mm.
spot on in the sense that just the range of writers, because
Yes,
there were people who hadn't written anything at all or hadn't published,
correct.
not written.
Mm,
I should
mm,
correct that. Hadn't published
mm,
anything
mm.
versus authors who'd published 30 books.
Loads, like really world
I mean,
class,
yes,
who had written for 30 years, 30 novels, sort of that
yes.
ilk of writer
And then
who,
children's books to nonfiction.
yes,
I mean, we
yes,
had
yes.
Dr.
The
Bill, who was a
poetry
psychologist.
and the yes, the psychology was amazing,
To
amazing.
poetry. I mean, just the range. And I think that exchange was also part of the magic, that
Oh,
to realize
definitely.
that we were all so different, so varied, with such completely different backgrounds, and still connected, and connected
Yes,
so well and so deeply.
yes, yes.
That was
It
amazing.
was it was really good. Now going back to your writing and stories, I just wanted to mention for the audience today that if you jump on to Sonia's website, soneesingh.com, and you sign up for her newsletter, she will gift you this little package of her beautiful poems. Now, I've obviously gone and done that, of course. But I just want to say, if you want to know more about the way that Sony writes, this is a wonderful way to get a tester of her work, and it's fabulous. It comes as a little ebook, and you get to sit, read, and enjoy. But also on Sony's website are all the books. Now, Sony, do you want to tell people what we're going to do over the course of this series in terms of your books? Do you want to save it for a surprise in the coming weeks?
Well, there will be a surprise for each of the books. How about that?
That's that's fantastic. So each of Sony's books, we have a surprise for those shows. We also will have a surprise for the novel, and
Mhm.
we will simultaneously launch Sony's novel not only in this show series but across the world. So it's kind of a big deal. And we'll be talking more about the novel in the upcoming shows. But for the first little while, we'll be having another conversation next week about Sony, and some more about her spiritual journey and the connection between spirituality and writing, why it's important to write, and why for women who are the natural born storytellers of the universe, and why it's important for them to write as well. Sonny, I want to finish the show off with your tagline or phrase, which is trust in your soul's inspiration. Can you quickly talk to us about this?
So it's trust in your soul's destination. Uh,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
okay.
Typo, Tony.
Although inspiration sounds good too. I like that.
And it's not the same. Trust in your soul's destination. My humble apologies, Sony.
No,
I've
no, it's all good.
typo.
It is actually the same, in the sense that where the inspiration came from really lies at the heart, perhaps of what we'll talk more next week, but
Yes,
it's
I was just
the
going to say
spiritual
this is
journey.
just the lead into next week
Mhm.
as well.
But it's that spiritual journey of recognizing that each and every one of us is here with a purpose, and
And a
that
reason.
purpose is not our job. It's our state
It's
of
not.
being. And that's what your soul tells you. And if you listen to the call of your soul, that
Mm.
destination isn't necessarily a place, it's a journey.
It is a journey, and we will expand on that further next week because, as you know, listeners, from the start of our story, Sonia's had such a diverse background, and she started in hospitality. She's got all the metaphysical study and journey behind her as well, and now writes amazing poetry and beautiful books. And so it is about that journey, which we will explore in next week's program. But for today, we are completely out of time already. Sonny, thank you so much. For the listeners, please reach out to Sonny on social media. You can reach out to Sonny on her website at www.soneesingh.com. That's SONEESINGH.com. Don't forget to sign up for her newsletter because then you'll get that free gift, which is amazing and gives you a taste of her beautiful work. Again, so much to talk to Sony about in these series, and please tune in next week where you'll catch the second show in our series. Sony, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today
you for
on
having
our
me.
new show, Poetry in Motion with Sonee Singh.
Yay.
I'm your co-host, Toni Lontis, and I'm delighted to introduce the world to the beautiful Sonee Singh and her
Thank
work.
you.
We will see you next week for another episode. Please join us then. Bye for now.
Bye.